Hello there. You are listening to Advancing Ideas, the Cultivators community podcast. Here we share real stories of real people making their ideas happen in big companies. My guest is Annie Wood, a lifelong learner who, by following her curiosity and exploring her interests, designs experiences for humans that create meaningful learning and connection, and who believes weirdos are awesome and proudly share her weirdness with the world through not your average training and whimsical events that help people to meet, share ideas, and engage in valuable conversations. So, hello, Annie.
Hello, good morning. Well, morning for me, afternoon for you.
And maybe evening for someone else. And, maybe somebody will even listen to this conversation night. You never know. So, like,
You never know. We're relevant any time of day.
yeah, it's a thing. So, Annie, tell me one thing about you that I can't find on your LinkedIn profile.
One thing you can't find on my LinkedIn profile that I think is a bit of a fun fact is that in my adult life, I've never had a job that existed before I had it. And so I'm really used to coming into an organization who has figured out that we need to do something different, but we don't really know what, and we're going to bring Annie in and hopefully she can figure it out. And so that's been kind of fun. I've never had to like live up to what someone else was doing in a role in an organization. I've always gotten to create my own path and find ways to contribute that I think are meaningful and valuable and that really suit my skill set.
Why do you think it happens that way?
I'm not sure. I always thought, in college, I feel like professors would say, oh, we're trying to prepare you for jobs that don't exist yet. And I kind of thought that was, not true. I was like, okay, that's just something that they're saying. But then it has ended up being true for me. And it's been really interesting to navigate that because it really takes a lot of learning and curiosity to understand why did an organization create this role or bring me in? What are they hoping for? And then trying to find ways to do that. So I don't really know why organizations are doing it, but I think it is because the world is changing so much and it's harder to lock people into here's specifically exactly what we need, but they have a general idea and then the trust in me to figure out the best ways to move forward is really a gift, I think.
And I would say that many folks would be afraid of that. Like, oh my God, I have to create something new. It's so like, no, it's so challenging. Like, what is the first step? And how do you feel about creating this new jobs, creating some new opportunities, and like, starting something new?
Yeah, it's really exciting for me, actually. I am not someone who loves to do the same thing day after day. I am not one who likes to quote unquote rinse and repeat, just like figure out one way to do it and then just keep doing it that way. If anyone's familiar with the Gallup Strengths Finder, one of my top strengths is maximizer. And so I really love to find like the way to do this a little bit better, incrementally improving. And so I think that's why that type of role or that type of opportunity is really interesting to me. And I think the other reason that I really enjoy this idea of there's not necessarily a prescriptive way to do it is there's a word that I love called equifinality. And it's basically that there are many ways to get to the same or similar result. And so, if we have a clear goal in mind as an organization of what my role should be, or a goal just what we're trying to accomplish together, I love the freedom to figure it out. I kind of like to push and pull on ideas. And as you said in my intro, I'm a little bit weird. So, I like to do things my own way or to try and put my own spin on something or to do something a way that maybe hasn't been tried before. And so, the freedom to do that when the role hasn't existed it means that no one else is saying, well, you should have done it that way when I bring an idea forward.
You talked about maximizer. So where is an activator? Is it the
Oh,
second
so
one?
Activator's in my top 10. Yeah. I am a nerd and so I bought like the whole top 30 or the 34 like full report from Gallup to just better understand like what are the things that are hanging out in that top 10 or 12 because they say the research shows that those are pretty stable in your lifetime. The ones in the middle, you know how to use, and then those like bottom 5 to 7 are just not going to be it for you. And so I was like kind of curious what those middle and bottom ones were so that I would learn how to build a team around me.
Welcome to the team because I also purchased 34 skills. So I totally understand. And I even read the full report and I went through like the whole deepness and I even went to like 40, 34s. Oh, what is all about? Like how can I use it? But then like, oh, whatever. So the number one is Activator. I go with it. So I totally understand you. And tell me, what was the first time that you felt that you influenced somebody's professional or personal life?
That's such a fun question, and I loved thinking about that because you had prompted that one a little bit before. And I used to work on a college campus, and so I got an opportunity to work with a lot of students and a lot of people who were in that space in their life where they were really exploring and where they were thinking about trying new things. And that's what I think really drew me to working with college students. And it was a student that I got to mentor in something called the Dragon Leadership Program. Dragons was the mascot of the college campus that I worked on at the time. And it was a student who I saw had a ton of potential and just needed a little bit of encouragement to pursue some of those things that she was curious about and that she kind of wanted to do, but maybe didn't have all the confidence. And so I said, well, hey, like, what would it take for you to apply for this leadership role that you're kind of interested in? She said, oh, well, I need a letter of recommendation and I have to make a resume and I have to do these things. And so I said, well, hey, like, let's do that together. I'll sit here with you. I'll coach you through a resume. I'll write you a recommendation letter. And I actually ended up leaving the university to go to a different job, but the student got selected for that leadership role. And so it was kind of fun to watch her from afar step into that leadership role and be able to really thrive and succeed. And we've kept in touch a little bit over the years, but it is one where I didn't realize the impact that I was having on that student's life until a couple years later when she was graduating. And she wrote me a thank you note and just said, hey, like you encouraging me to do that changed the trajectory of what I did in college and helped me understand what I actually really want to like pursue as a career. And I had no idea that that's how that was going to turn out. And it's really fun. And it just reminds me that we have limitless amounts of encouragement to give to people. And so, like, why would I be stingy with that? Why would I hold that back? Why would I not offer that? And I'm not going to try and send someone off to do something I don't believe they could succeed at. But I think so often people need that idea of challenge and support, where it's we got to challenge ourselves to reach our potential, and we need to know that we have people supporting us in the back end who truly believe that we're capable of doing the things we want to pursue.
And I feel like sometimes it's enough to have just one person who really believes in you or and who really supports you because sometimes it feels like I kind of do this, maybe not, nobody has done it before. Should I take this step? Should I? But then just someone, yeah, you can do it, go for it, and then you're all in. So yeah, it's a great story. Thank you very much for sharing it. And I'm curious, what is the main difference between working with students and adults?
I think sometimes there's not that big of a difference, honestly. I think the biggest difference though is that often students know that they don't know things and they're in that learning mode very naturally. And so they are asking questions and they're curious and they're a little more willing to say, I'm not sure how to do that, or I need help doing that, or could you point me in the right direction? Whereas I think sometimes adults or professionals feel like they should know. And so we have to figure out ways to break down that barrier of it's okay to not know something. It's okay to ask for help. It's good to be curious and for us to continue growing and changing and making an approach to the work that we're doing that's going to continue to evolve and serve the needs of the changing world, that we have to stay curious. And so I think that's the biggest difference is students are really naturally positioned for curiosity, and adults and professionals sometimes are need a little nudge in that direction. But once you can get them to exist in that space, I think the possibilities are limitless. And there's not that much different when people are passionate and care about the work they're trying to do.
It's so weird that kids are so curious. Usually they ask all those questions. Sometimes you cannot even think about all the questions kids ask. And the more they're growing up, like students also ask questions a little less. And adults are like, no, I won't ask. No, no, please, no. So talking about weirdness. So in your TED talk, you shared that the origins of the word weird are fate and destiny, like our past and future actions that make us who we are. And in a corporate environment, people usually try to hide their weird or let's say different parts from others. So how do you embrace your weirdness at work? And what weirdness mean for you?
Yeah. Well, you hit it spot on. For me, it's weirdness is that idea of fate and destiny. And I get nerding out on like the etymology of words and like where do they come from? And so that idea of there's things that are born into us, that idea of nature versus nurture, right? We don't need to debate it here today, but helping nurture some of those things in me of, hey, that's a little bit of a different perspective, or that's a different way of thinking. I feel like my mom, and I had a great aunt who was really encouraging of those things and would kind of nudge me in those directions. And a couple of really great teachers and mentors throughout my life who just said, "Hey, that perspective is unique. That's a little different, and that's good." And so I think having people who have encouraged that difference in me has been really powerful. And I think that's like it's nurturing that nature that's in me. And then I think the other part of weirdness for me is that idea of like, what have I said yes to? What am I willing to say yes to that allows me to have some new paths open up? And so for me, weirdness really is what are all the things that kind of are in me that I want to bring into the world, and what am I willing to do, and what am I willing to risk, and make myself vulnerable to share some of that difference. And I am, a straight white woman in my mid 30s in the US. And so I have a lot of privilege. And so for me, recognizing that it's probably a lot easier for me to exist and to share those differences and those things in the spaces that I exist in, can hopefully help open up that opportunity to others. Or and I'm not trying to say that I am paving the way for everything and everyone. And I know that me showing up that way and encouraging that and keeping an eye out for what are the other ways that people are bringing themselves to work, or bringing themselves to their organizations or even to their volunteer roles that I can encourage and be on the lookout for, can hopefully make a bit of a difference for people to say, hey, it is okay for me to show up or to bring this idea forward, or to say, I have another way of doing that. Could we try it? And so for me in my current job, I get to serve as the chief of staff at a small creative studio called Tellwell in Fargo, North Dakota. And part of my role is hiring and bringing people in and onboarding them. And then I also get to oversee our project management team. And one of my newest project managers has been with us now for about 2 months. And she looked at me the other day in our one-on-one and said, I am never worried about being the weirdest person here because I think you have that title. And I like that just made me smile so big because like that is my goal, that no one will feel ashamed of bringing themselves to work. No one will feel like, oh, I have to hide that part of me. No one will feel like, oh, that idea is a little too out there to bring. And so I just do really try to live very out loud when it comes to those types of things, because I know that when I can demonstrate that this is good and like in a leadership position in our organization to say, hey, this is welcome, this is good. I throw out all my bad ideas too, so that people, like, if we're brainstorming, we're a creative studio. So we need to get some of those things. And often those nuggets of great creativity are buried in kind of a bad idea that we can iterate on. And so that idea of like, what is weird to me is really bringing myself and showing those pieces of me that maybe you say, oh, that's a little off of the quote unquote norm, and really encouraging that in other people too, and being mindful and paying attention to call those things out in a really positive way and to continue to encourage it.
I feel like you are talking about such a thriving environment, and I feel like everyone would love to be in those space, but I think that not everyone is privileged to be in the same environment, because sometimes it's so hard to really share your idea openly. Sometimes people are hiding their ideas, and I'm curious, like from your perspective, if you are in not that supportive environment, what is a good way to at least start sharing your ideas with others?
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful question to ask. And I think that is so situational, right? Where it's kind of figuring out like what is it that I'm willing to risk? And there's a great definition of the word trust from Charles Feltman that I really love. And I'm not going to get this perfect, but the gist of it is that trust is really risking making something you care about vulnerable to somebody else.
Hmm.
And so I think that is where things have to start. If you don't feel like you're maybe in that most supportive environment, is there someone within that organization that you can trust? Because weirdness requires a little bit of vulnerability, right? Weirdness says, I'm going to risk this part of myself that maybe I love and I hold dear, and I'm going to risk making that vulnerable and showing it to somebody else. And so finding those smaller spaces those within a big space where there's one person you can trust. Or maybe test that idea out a little bit in a space where you say, hey, maybe not presenting this in a company-wide meeting, but is there a couple people that I could say, could we go to lunch or could we grab a coffee? I have an idea. It's a little out there, right? And I think also sometimes setting yourself up to say, hey, this idea, I think it's a little out there, right? Helps prepare people to enter that space with you, or even to give them a few, guidelines of, hey, I really want to share this idea. What I hope is that you'll listen to it first before you start telling me what could or couldn't work about it. Like, let me get all the way through this. Those types of things that can kind of help people know how to show up with you. Because so often, people do what they just are naturally inclined to do unless we invite them into a process with us. And so finding someone where you feel a little bit more sense of trust and willingness to risk, and then giving them that guidance of, hey, here's how I want you to listen, or here's the type of feedback that I'm looking for, could be a much more positive experience than just blurting out your kind of crazy idea and risking something a little bit bigger.
It's all about finding an ally and somebody who can be with. Yeah, I fully agree. Like I cannot agree more. And I feel like sometimes people are just afraid of finding someone, afraid of sharing their a little bit of weirdness. And then I feel like those weird parts are the best parts, and there are such amazing ideas behind them. So recently you shared that your company declared 2024 the year of curiosity. And during 2 days of retreat, the whole team showed up with curious hearts and minds. So tell me more about what do you do for team retreats?
Yeah, so at Tellwell, we're a team of about 15 or so. And one of the things that we really believe in is that we have to have strong relationships in order to do great work together. As creative folks, right, when you have a relationship, you're much more open to sharing ideas, building on ideas, providing feedback, all those types of things. And so twice a year, we actually set aside 2 days of time for our team to be together. And so, as the chief of staff, I get to design those days, but I always do it with input from the team and from other folks on our leadership team as well. And so, when we really think about what is it going to take for Tellwell to continue growing, and what are the things that we need to do to deepen those relationships, that's kind of how I frame up our retreat. And so, yeah, as you mentioned, we declared 2024 the year of curiosity. And so, we actually put up we have big windows in our office, and so we wrote all across one of them in window marker the curiosity parking lot, because we wanted to encourage people to be curious, but know that we can't always in that moment follow our curiosity. And so we put post-it notes out. We said, hey, anytime you have a curious thought, like throw it on this window. And then I actually went through all of those to try and see, are there any themes in here of what my team is really curious about that I can build into our retreat? And so we've had some shifts and changes in the team in the last 6 or so months with bringing new people in and hiring. And so I really saw a theme of, hey, I really want time to get to know some of my newer coworkers. I saw people saying, hey, I'm really curious about how do we tell stories of people who maybe have really different lived experiences than us. And I saw curiosity kind of around this idea of what are some other ways that we can tap into our curiosity or be inspired by other creative people. So we set up the space that we wanted to do our retreat. We actually booked a space at a local art museum. And so I was like, cool, we're going to infuse ourselves into a creative space. I set up the day to really take the morning, and we spent probably the first hour of the morning with these cool deck of cards called Story Stitch cards. And Tellwell focuses a lot on telling the stories of people and companies. And so it was an opportunity to invite people in to tell stories. And so often people need that little bit of shielded vulnerability where, hey, this card told me to answer this question, or this card told me to ask this question. So kind of giving them a warm up and really like laying some of that foundation for them to feel connected was really important for us then to go into the rest of the retreat and push and pull on ideas as we are going into our 10th year as a company at Tellwell. We wanted to relook at, what are the things we're trying to do? Who are the clients we serve best? What do we want more of at Tellwell? And then we also spent some time with a trainer who came in to talk with us about diversity, equity, belonging, and justice. And I also just really wanted to make sure that we were setting people up to be curious in that, because that can be a topic that people have really different lived experiences that they bring. They maybe have different learnings and different trainings. And so wanted to create some of that openness so that people can be curious, because when we can focus on being learners instead of knowers, I think we have much better conversations. We have much healthier relationships. And so the whole retreat was really set setting us up to say, how do we exist in curious spaces where people are pushing boundaries? How do we strengthen our relationships so that we feel comfortable pushing and pulling on ideas together where none of the questions that we're asking or the back and forth that we're having is about people. It's always about the ideas and keeping those at the forefront of what we're trying to do is make Tellwell the best organization where we all get a chance to contribute to it and we tell great stories that are authentic to the people who are trusting us to tell them.
I really love the story that you shared about decks of cards that like, oh, this card told me to ask this question. Or it sounds like pretty much like, oh, my friend is curious if, like in this way of, and I feel like it's a great way to really, ask what you wanted to ask or share what you wanted to share, but not in a way that, somebody told you to do this. I mean, like, oh, I'm asking this question because I'm curious, but oh, yeah, I'm curious, but also it's written on this card. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I love about think like tools that you can use to invite conversation is there's a lot of great resources out there. And so I'm like, hey, let's use these because it invites conversation. They're often like tested and designed to help open up those pathways in our brains for connection with people. And they're also, when you have a whole deck of cards, if the first card in the deck is not the one that you want to ask, like you can just keep going. The rule is just like you have to eventually ask a question. And so it's fun because it helps people exist in a space where they can be curious and not necessarily trying to think about how do I formulate the best question? Because there's sometimes like a little bit of pressure there. But instead, they're like, I just have to go through this deck of cards and find one that I want to ask or find a question that I want to answer.
talking about this pressure, how do you think, what is a good way to deal with public opinion?
Ooh, this idea of public opinion. That's a big question, Yuri. Um, I think at the end of the day, for me, and the life that I want to live, I recognize that like my actions and my words have impact. And so what I hope to do is have a positive effect on the people that I connect with. And if that means taking a stand for something, where I am using my power and privilege in an organization or in a community to advocate for someone else, if that is something that they've asked for, where if I'm, thinking about like risking, right, like I said earlier, like I'm a straight white woman in my 30s in the US, like in the upper Midwest even of the US. And so like I have the opportunity to take different risks. And so that idea of like I can weather a storm of public opinion in a different way than maybe some of the other folks that I know and care about can. And so for me, this idea of public opinion is like who are the people who know me well? What do they think? What do they experience? And I care much more about their opinions and their experience than broader public opinion. I am by no means a public figure in my community. Though I would say like, folks know me from, from doing a TED Talk and from some of the roles that I've held in different organizations. But what I hope is that people look at the sum total of the work that I've been doing. And if they're going to judge me on that, or talk to someone who knows me, who's engaged with me, who's interacted with me to go beyond the surface. And I know that not everyone's going to do that. And so, I just, at some point, you just have to kind of accept that, like, if I tried to please everyone, I would please no one, or I would just do what the majority wants. And that's probably not what I want. And so, finding ways to really commit to like, what is the way that I want to live? How do I live aligned with my values? And how do I really, at the end of the day, can I look back and say, even if I messed things up, was I coming from a place where I tried to do the most good? And if I didn't do well, like how can I go back and make amends for some of that? So that idea of public opinion for me, I just kind of gave up on it years ago. And maybe that's the power of, getting older. It's just like, hey, I know who I am. I know what I can do. And if someone doesn't know that about me, then they probably haven't gotten to know me.
Now, I some time ago I saw chocolate ad, and it was the saying like, "If you forgive our imperfection, we'll forgive yours." And I didn't understand it back then, but nowadays I totally understand that people are imperfect. Like there are no perfect people, even those people who think that they are perfect, they are imperfect. And as long as someone can go with you being imperfect, like it's totally okay, like we have to embrace it and be our truly weird selves, I guess. So yeah, I totally understand what you're talking about. And What was the main challenge you faced while working on the retreat project?
Ooh, I think that the thing when I was working on the retreat that was maybe the most challenging really is like, how do you pace a day, or a couple of days of content so that people have time and space to think, where we aren't just going from one thing to the next to the next? Because there was so much content that we could have covered. And so I think for me, it was paring down all of the ideas I had to say, what are the most important ones? What are the things that I could infuse into a team meeting a different way, or, kind of what should the retreat really look like and be, so that people had time and space to process. And so that was kind of nice because I had way more ideas than I needed. I was not sitting there being like, oh no, how do I fill one more hour of a day? It was really, okay, how do I actually take a few of these things out and maybe keep them in a parking lot or some of those things. And, I'm fortunate we have a weekly all team meeting. And so there's times when I can use part of that to bring an idea forward, to remind people of something we talked at retreat. And so for us, that idea of a retreat is like 2 really dedicated days. And one of the biggest goals of that is time together and learning together. And so then it's how can I use that idea throughout the rest of the year too, where I can sprinkle in a few things that we maybe didn't get to include in the retreat. So for me, it's always way more ideas than I have time for is my biggest challenge.
What is one thing that you would have done differently for the next year's retreat?
Ooh, well, the good news is I get to do one in 6 months again. So, always building on the retreats. I think for me, recognizing that the team really loved that opportunity to have those like more intimate one-on-one or like, groups of 3 or 4 conversations. And I had initially only planned that for like the first morning to kind of start off the retreat. And I think they wanted more time for stuff like that. And so I think it is kind of fun to know how much they value that. And I think the other thing that they loved was there was just enough structure to those conversations where it didn't go off on too many rabbit trails or, no one could quite dominate the conversation because of the way the activity was structured. And so I think for me, I want to incorporate a little bit more of that into the future retreat where I realize there's a great book by Priya Parker called The Art of Gathering, and she talks about being a generous host, that
Yeah.
sometimes that means giving people a little bit of structure. And I think going into this retreat, I thought, oh, well, if I leave lunchtime and some of that unstructured, then people will have the opportunity to have conversation and connection. And I think that the challenge in that is like, oh, not everyone, like people want different levels of conversation throughout the day. And so for me, it's like, oh, okay, how do I find that right balance of like enough structure so we get the types of conversations we want and enough freedom so that people can follow their curiosity. And I think there's always going to be a tension there on how much people want because I have 15 totally different humans who want probably 15 slightly different things. And so finding the ways to make sure that throughout the retreat too, we're being really flexible on like, oh, okay, we can adjust this or we can change the flow of that kind of based on real-time feedback is something that I've always tried to do as a facilitator. But I think sometimes I really love my plan and I'm like, but it's a great plan and I know what's going to happen if we follow the plan. And so for me, I think just like learning to be a little, even just a little more flexible, is what I hope to bring to our next retreat.
No, I always feel like that a great host is a person who eats the last cookie on a plate, so nobody feels bad about that they ate a last cookie. So, and I feel like you've never have this problem with actions. I feel like you have as exactly what you've told me that you have this challenge that you have too many ideas and too many things to work on. But what are the three smallest actionable steps for any cultivator who wants to make their ideas happen in their organizations?
Yeah, I think one of the smallest actions that you can do is write them down so you don't forget them. So many people have great ideas, but they don't do anything with them right away, and then they kind of fade away into the ether. And so I keep a Google Doc where I just capture ideas, and it can live there. I have lots of ideas, some that I've gone back to. So even when I was like planning this retreat, I went back to that Google Doc, and I was like, hey, what are the ideas that I've been having throughout the last 6 months about a retreat and could pull from those. So I think that's one small action is like start yourself a Google Doc where you can write down your ideas. The second one I think is finding ways to support other people's ideas. So ask people, right? invite that conversation. Be the one who says, hey, what are some things you're thinking about? Or what's one thing you'd love to try? And then asking, how can I help support that? Is there a way that I can support you? Because when you've supported others, that's a great way for them to say, hey, I want to invest in your idea as well. And it's not necessarily like about this idea of like give and take where we're trading equally, but it's that idea of being a giver where you may give to 17 people and help their ideas come to life. And that's the point, is to help ideas come to life. And so you start to build that culture of people giving and supporting. And you get to be part of that by just asking people and then showing up in ways that is supportive. And I think the third thing I would recommend that's a small action is to set aside time. Like maybe it's once a week where is it just coffee with yourself or you have a little think time. Because so often our brains are really busy, our days are really full. And so if there is just a few of those, a few moments that you have where you can trigger that your brain to be thinking in a more creative space. I think that is something that I try and do. So we have like a fancy coffee machine at work, and I am actually a tea drinker. And so I just use the hot water button, but it still has to fill my cup. And so like while the cup is filling, sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, like what are the things, that are going on? How can I just use those little bits of space to have some think time or to take some deep breaths and just try to clear my head. So building those little types of rituals into your day where you're creating a little bit of space for your brain to maybe not be working quite so hard, I would recommend, because that's where a lot of times an idea percolates in that space for me.
I really love this idea of coffee with yourself. So thank you. I'm stealing it for myself. And Annie, I really wish to have the sky is the limit, but time is the limit. So the final question, name one book or podcast or person from whom you learned the most.
From who I have learned the most. Wow. I think someone who comes to mind immediately, kind of based on the conversation we've been having, is his name's Chad Littlefield. He's a facilitator, an educator, a thought leader in the US. And he really emphasizes this idea of asking powerful questions and creating connection before content. And so he's someone who really designs wonderful experiences for people to connect and to be curious together and to create spaces for learning. And so he's one who I've gotten his books. I listen to a lot of his YouTube videos and those types of things, and I borrow from his ideas all the time. And so he's someone that I would love for people to check out if they're listening to this podcast and you've liked anything that I've said. I probably have mishmashed and cobbled some of those things together from a lot of people, but Chad is probably one of those underlying undercurrents of people that I'm always paying attention to the things that he's thinking about and saying, because I really appreciate his approach to curiosity and to connection among humans.
What is the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to find me. I'm on LinkedIn. That's a great, easy way to connect with me. Otherwise, you can always go to Tellwell's website, wetellwell.com, and find me there. You can send me an email. Always love to connect with people who are curious, who have questions, who want to talk about how do we design experiences for more human connection, or how do I bring my weirdness into the world? So connect with me anywhere and everywhere on the internet. Or if you're ever in Fargo, North Dakota, I would love to take you to coffee and or a cocktail, and we'll chat about weirdness and curiosity.
Open date invitation. I love that.
Well, when are you going to get here? Come to Fargo.
Definitely. I'm creating the map of who states and countries I want to visit. So yeah, one day
Add Fargo
I'll
to your list, Yuri.
totally. It's already there. So, Annie, thank you so much for openly sharing your cultivators journey. And it's such a valuable experience for all the change makers in the world who want to make a difference.
Well, thanks so much for having me. You asked wonderful questions, and it was really fun to think and to have coffee with you during my start to my day, and just really love leaning into this conversation. Thank you for creating the space and for asking beautiful questions that can lead to really, I think, hopefully some good insights for you and me when we listen back to our coffee conversation.
Exactly. And yeah, see you in the cultivators community.